welcome to the first lesson in 1060. Let's start 1060 trigonometry by going over some basic geometry vocabulary. Make sure we're all on the same page before we even get started. So let's start with what is a ray. A ray is a segment of a line that goes on forever in one direction. So it starts at a point and then goes on forever in a direction. That's what a ray is. The initial point is the beginning of that ray. So that little guy right there. Now, that brings us to the first really important vocab word, which is an angle. An angle is two rays that share a common initial point. So I put two rays together. They come together at a single point. Those rays can go off in any direction I please. I'm going to make mine go like that. And that's an angle. Two rays that share a common initial point. The vertex of that angle is the common initial point that they share. So that right there. That's what we call the vertex of the angle. Now the reason we're starting by talking about these things is that trigonometry literally means the study of triangles. We know a triangle is a shape that has three angles. And that's what we'll be studying the entire semester is triangles. And for the most part, like 80-90% of the time, we're specifically going to study right triangles and talk about their properties. So before we can talk about triangles, we should probably know what an angle is and how to define it. So this entire lesson today, we actually won't even get into triangles. We're just going to be talking about angles. We're going to first start by talking about angles in degrees and how to graph them, how to measure them, and then we'll be talking about angles in radians for this lesson. Next lesson in 1.2, we'll start into right triangles and SOHCAHTOA. So, since we'll just be focusing on angles today, let's go through and do some definitions about angles. First, we have a straight angle. A straight angle is two rays that go in opposite directions. So I have two rays, they go in opposite directions. That's what we call a straight angle. And you probably already know already, the measurement of that angle is 180 degrees, which is something else we'll talk about today. The measure of an angle is the number that indicates the amount of rotation between the rays of an angle. So anytime we talk about degrees, we're talking about the measure of that angle, which is the amount of rotation between those rays. How far are those two rays rotated? And that's the measurement between them. So really, when we're talking about angles, we're measuring distance. The distance of the rotation between the two rays. That's what the measurement of an angle is. Now, you've probably heard of degrees and radians. And you might ask, why do we need radians if degrees work? Same reason we have a ton of different ways to measure distance in the real world. We can measure in feet, we can measure in meters, we can measure in miles, we can measure in kilometers. There are a ton of different ways we measure distance. Same thing for angles. We have two different ways that we measure the distance between those rays, the amount of rotation. One way is degrees, another way is radians. It's the same distance, the same measurement, just two different ways to measure it. With that in mind, let's do a couple more angle definitions. We have an acute angle, which is an angle that measures between 0 degrees and 90 degrees. We have an obtuse angle, which is an angle that measures between 90 degrees and 180 degrees. So a couple examples. Here is an acute angle, less than 90. Here is an obtuse angle, greater than 90, or between 90 and 180. And we have a right angle, which is an angle that measures exactly 90 degrees. Now, something to keep in mind, a right angle must be exactly 90 degrees. If that angle measures 90.1, that is not a right angle. That is an obtuse angle. That's between 90 and 180. So, anytime we have a right angle, we put a box in the corner to signify that it is exactly 90 degrees. And this is important. If you see a problem in your homework or in our lessons or on your exams and it looks like a right angle, but it doesn't have the box, you cannot assume that it is a right angle. It might be 90.1 degrees instead. So that is why we use that box to signify it. It's very important. Two more vocab words. We have supplementary, which are two angles whose measure adds up to 180 degrees. So two angles that when you add them together make a straight angle. So I have this angle and I have that angle. And I add them together, it makes a straight angle, 180 degrees. Complementary is two angles whose measure adds up to 90 degrees. So two angles that when I add them together, they make a right angle. That's complementary. So that is all our really important vocab to get us started off in 1.1. In the next video, we'll dive a little bit deeper into degrees and talking about how many degrees are in a circle and how we can divide it up from there.